Hi, I'm Jill from Friends on the Block. In this video, I continue our series called How to Teach Anyone to Read and Have Fun While Doing It. I'll be explaining how to teach letter sounds. I'll be following the sequence of skills in Friends on the Block, beginning with our first 3 levels when students are preparing to decode or sound out words. You can use your own materials to implement the ideas in our videos or use our free ebooks and games. You may also be interested in our other materials for purchase. Our goal at Friends on the Block is to help ensure that everyone, regardless of disability or circumstance, learns to read. We combine phonics and word learning to make reading as meaningful as possible, with kids reading in books from the very beginning of the program. We want our lessons to be both efficient and effective, and very friendly and easy to use, as well as fun. The objective I'm focusing on today is saying the sounds for individual letters. So the exact objective would be written like, the student will say the sound, or the most common sound, for individual letters. So when the student sees a letter, like the letter S, then they would say the sound, S. And when they see the letter T, they would say T. One thing you may notice with these is with the letter S, I stretched the sound, S. But with the letter T, I made it really quick, T. I'll be talking more about this later in the video, and it's very important. The basic steps for practicing letter sounds are very straightforward. You would say, when I touch the letter, say the letter sound. Remember to say the sound for as long as I touch it. Then you'd hold up the letter, and then you would say the letter sound. And when it's a sound that you can stretch, you're going to hold your finger down. So let me show you this one. Say the letter sound. S. And if it's a sound you cannot stretch, like the T sound, then you would say the letter sound, and the child would say T. So you're going to either tap when it's a short sound, or you're going to hold when it's a sound that you can stretch, and you just hold it for about 2 to 3 seconds. The first few times you do it, I would say that whole sentence, when I touch the letter, say the letter sound. Remember to say the sound for as long as I touch it. Say all of that. But once you and your student get used to it, then you don't necessarily have to keep saying that. You can also phrase it in your own words, but I would recommend trying it this way since it's been very effective for us. The first time that you introduce a letter sound, you follow a slightly different procedure because you want to model first. And you do the same thing if a student makes a mistake. If they say the wrong sound or they just are quiet and don't know what it is, then you follow this procedure. And we call this a straightforward basic I, we, you. So they're going to listen to you say the sound, then you're going to have them say it with you, and then they're going to have a turn. So if you're holding it up, you would say, listen. Say it with me. S. Now your turn. And the child would say S. So don't forget to stretch those continuous sounds and keep the stop sound short. And just like in my other videos when we talked about errors, if they make a mistake within 2 to 4 seconds, go ahead and jump in and model that letter sound. Down here at the bottom of this slide, you can see the sequence in which we teach the letter sounds in Friends on the Block. But you may be following a different program that uses a different sequence. It is really important that you have a sequence, but there isn't one exact sequence to follow. A couple of things you might want to remember is that you should separate letters that are really confusing. So you don't want to introduce B and then shortly thereafter introduce the letter D, because they look so much alike and they're really easy for students to confuse. So any other letters that you think students may confuse, it's best to separate those. And then you want to teach the more common letters before you teach the less common letters. So just the letters that are going to be more useful you want to teach first. And then you want to teach letters that are easier over letters that are harder. So the letter S is very easy, but saying the letter sound for W is much harder. So that would be one you might put off until a little later. It's also less common, so it's one that you can wait to learn. Our focus in this video is the most common sound that each letter represents. So the most common sound for the letter C is K, the same sound that you would hear in the letter K. So that's why we've written the letter K one time here, so you know it's a really quick sound. You want to say K. You don't want to say K, but just a quick K. The most common sound represented by the letter F is F, as in fish. This is how I write out the sounds, a very common convention that is used. And anytime it's a sound that can be stretched, you'll see it has 3 of those letters. So the most common sound represented by the letter P is P, as in pie. And notice we said P, not P. So let me go through the rest of these. M, as in milk. S, as in sock. T, as in toe. D, as in dog. Now that one's a little bit more difficult to not add an after it. So sometimes one trick that I use is to kind of say a I sound in your head, like did, or think of the word did and d, and it makes it a little bit easier to say it quickly. And then j, jump. N, as in net. B, as in ball. G, as in game. H, as in ham. Now the L is a little hard to say, but if you think about a word that begins with L, like lion, stretch that out. Lion. And now say it without the rest of the word. L. So the L says L. And the R is a little difficult too, because it depends on where it is in the word, as to exactly how it sounds. But at the beginnings of words, it's pronounced rain. Hear it in rain. Rain. Not we don't say rain. We say rain. There's a link below to this wonderful video that's put out by the University of Florida. And Dr. Holly Lane is demonstrating how to say the most common sound for each of the letters. She does a wonderful job, and it's a great video to go back to and listen to and practice. Now that I've covered the basics of how to teach letter sounds, I want you to think about how you use them in the routine. Now, we went over this routine in a previous video, so if you haven't seen it, please go back and watch that video. I hope that you'll find it helpful. The first part of the routine is to do a quick warm-up. So you may want to introduce or practice a few letter sounds during the warm-up. I'm going to describe that in just a minute. And then during your book reading, at this stage, the students won't have enough skills yet to know how to sound out words. We've got some other things we need to teach them so they're ready to sound out words. But you may encourage kids to notice the letters that you are teaching them in the books that you're reading. So they may find those letters and you may want to remind them of the sounds. I would just do that with the sounds that you're working on right now. The final part of the lesson routine is the game or fun learning activity. And that's where you want to provide a lot of practice. When you introduce or practice the sounds, the letter sounds in the warm-up, that should be really short, just a few letter sounds. But during the game, that's where you can get a lot of repetition because it's going to be fun and engaging. So next I'm going to talk a little bit more about the warm-up and about the games. One option for the warm-up is echo reading the letter sounds. So this is basically what I showed you a couple of minutes ago when you introduce a new sound. So you can do this when you're introducing a sound. You can also do it if a child is really struggling and you know they need a lot of support. So this is one way to practice when a student is struggling a lot. So the way this is going to work is you're going to say, listen, my turn. S, your turn. And the child would say, S. My turn. Your turn. My turn. T. Your turn. And I shouldn't have touched it when I was doing it because that can get confusing. So that was kind of a good thing that I made that mistake because it does work better if you just say my turn, t, and then touch it when it's their turn. So they get used to that tap. Again, echo reading is good to use when you're first introducing one or more letters, or it's also good to use whenever a child is really struggling and just needs a lot of support. Another option for warm-ups is pick up letters. This is just a little bit easier than the straight practice, but a little bit harder than the echo letters. So this way, you're going to choose whatever letter sounds you want to practice. You want to mix them up and lay them down in front of the student. So you lay them down in front of the student and say, listen, find it and pick it up. And so they would find the letter F And then you would ask them, what's the sound? And they would say, listen. S. Then they'd find that letter, and you would say, what's the sound? S. The child would say, S. Listen. T. Find it and pick it up. And then you would ask them, they would pick it up, and you would ask them, what's the sound? T. And be sure that they're saying those stretch sounds, stretching those out, and a stop sound quickly. It is important if they don't do that, that you go ahead and stop and model it the correct way. The last warm-up option I'm going to list for you is exactly what I went over before, just those basic steps of when I touch the letter, say the letter sound. Remember to say the sound for as long as I touch it. And then you're going to say the letter sound. And the child would say, T. Say the letter sound. S. So you notice the last time I didn't repeat, say the letter sound. So only say the letter sound if you need to. The important thing is that they say that letter sound and that they say it quickly when it's a stop sound, and they stretch it out when it's one that you can stretch out. So keep in mind again that the warm-up's going to be really, really fast. But where you want to get the most practice is going to be during the game or the fun learning activity. So what you need to do for that is just to choose or create a fun game or activity to practice the letter sounds that your student needs to practice, whichever sounds they're on. You can also include sounds that you want to review. You want to make sure they're going to get a lot of opportunities to practice during the game. And you do customize the game, as I just said, so you're having them practice the letter sounds that student is working on, including a few sounds for review. So as you learn more sounds, you can keep these sounds in there and use those as review. Remember to always provide help quickly during the game. My co-author, Dr. Jennifer Cheatham, has a video already on YouTube about using board games to practice a variety of reading skills. You can look at that video and get some great ideas for how you can practice letter sounds. If she has in there that you're practicing words, you can just use the same activity for practicing sounds. So to do this, you can choose a favorite game of your student, so something they already know and they already like to play. Just make a set of letter cards for them to practice, and then you're going to play the game. And each time it's their turn, you're going to practice saying a letter sound right before you take your turn. If you're playing with them, just you and the student, have them practice saying a letter sound on your turn too. So each turn you would do that first. And of course, provide help quickly during the game. Jennifer also has another video about making sensory boxes, which is a great way to practice letter sounds. You can use water beads, sand, or rice in a container. You're going to put plastic letters of the letters you want to practice in that container, and you take turns reaching in and finding a letter and saying the sound for that letter. So I would encourage you to watch that video to find out exactly how to do that one. So just a couple of reminders. Remember to get into a routine. You want your student to be in the habit of practicing reading and practicing reading skills. During the games in particular, you want to keep the pace very brisk and lively, but don't rush. That'll make it more fun. And it'll also give them more practice time. Of course, as I've said several times, don't forget to provide help quickly, usually within 2 to 4 seconds. You don't want your student to struggle. If they don't know something or they get it wrong, just immediately model and have them repeat. And don't forget to smile and praise them frequently. In these first 3 levels, when you're preparing to decode, there are a number of skills that are really important that you develop. We just went over letter sounds, and that is a critical one. But we're also going to have another video. Our next one is going to be on blending sounds and segmenting words, or phonemic awareness, if you're familiar with that term. So the next video will be all about that. Then we'll have a video on irregular words. We'll also talk about print awareness and vocabulary, comprehension, and oral expression, which are really important to develop from the very beginning. And we'll talk about story structure, like retelling in a fiction story or a nonfiction book. So we'll cover these things in future videos, but these are all the things that you should be working on while you're working on letter sounds. So all of these are important in these first few levels. I want to make a couple of comments about the research and the reason that we structured and made the choices that we did for focusing on letter sounds, particularly since the focus was on letter sounds and I didn't mention letter names. So this begs the question, should I teach letter names before the sounds, or should I teach letter names at the same time as I teach the letter sounds? Knowing the letter names is definitely very useful and helps you learn sounds. But the letter sounds are more important. That's what you use when you're sounding out words, and that's what you use when you're spelling. So you listen to a word, you think about the sound and what letter goes with that sound. So my opinion about this is, if your child is in preschool or if they're in kindergarten and they're not struggling, they're really learning on time, teaching both letter names and letter sounds is great. You probably want to start with letter names. That's what most of us do because we're really familiar with them, and that's great. Or you could do letter names and sounds together. But for those kindergarten students who are struggling, and for older students, I recommend focusing on the sounds. For some information about the research behind teaching letter sounds versus letter names and which ones you should do first, Dr. Tim Shanahan has a really great blog specifically on this topic. The link is below. And then I also want to point you to a really wonderful book written by Rollanda O'Connor, and she provides great practical guidance and explanations and a step-by-step how to teach different skills, and her book includes brief explanations of the research behind what her recommendations are. So if you want to know more about the research, I would recommend these two resources. And then finally, if you have found our videos to be helpful, we really appreciate your support. Tell other people about us. Like us, follow us, share, subscribe on social media. Become a free member on our website where you get 17 of our e-readers for free. We have some of our games that stay on that website. And then we also have monthly giveaways. Consider making a purchase if that's something you'd like to do. Our premium digital membership includes lots of games and activities digitally that you can print. And then we also have physical products. We have books and games and ready-to-go instructional kits if that's something that you're interested in. Thank you so much for watching.